I discovered a secret that shattered my world. My wife, Emily, had been unfaithful, entangled in a passionate affair that brought our family to the brink of collapse. As I grapple with the betrayal and confront the reality of our broken vows, join me on a journey through love, lies, and a quest for truth. Subscribe to our channel for more riveting tales of infidelity that will leave you questioning the sanctity of marriage. Webster's dictionary definition of the word suspicion is considerably lacking in the ability to clearly indicate the insidiousness that operates on the trapped mind. At the very beginning, suspicion is more like a tiny worm that penetrates the psyche and takes up residence there. It may lie dormant for weeks or months, but it never dies. It sleeps quietly in the recesses of the mind, waiting to be fed with new doubts. Suspicion is the dark side of the mind. Where there is suspicion, there is no joy or happiness. It can paralyze its victim to the point of inaction or induce a state of terror that deprives the victim of the ability to reason correctly. Why am I so obsessed with the word suspicion? The simple answer is that all the devastating events of the last 2 months began with a small unexpected observation that planted a worm of suspicion in my mind. Until this event occurred for 17 years, I had never had the slightest doubt about my wife's fidelity. 5 days a week I wake up before my wife and children. I formed this habit that forces me to slip out of bed and quietly move to the gym located in the basement. I have several modern pieces of exercise equipment that allow me to exercise in peace for half an hour while the rest of the family sleeps upstairs. A vigorous workout on the rowing machine and treadmill awakens my entire body. It was Tuesday morning when I woke up a little earlier than usual. Instead of lying in bed for another 15 minutes, I got up and headed to the gym. I finished my workout early and headed upstairs to shower and get dressed for work. When I entered the bedroom, Emily was not in bed. In one swift motion I opened the bathroom door and stepped inside. Emily stood there getting ready to put on her bra. Her smooth, firm breasts rose slowly as she inhaled and exhaled. I smiled at her and then my eyes noticed a strange dark black and blue mark on Emily's left breast. The mark was oval in shape, about the size of a quarter. My eyes left the dark mark and settled on Emily's surprised face for about 20 milliseconds. There was an expression that I had never seen in Emily's eyes. A strong feeling of guilt flashed through them as her mind registered the fact that I'd just seen a dark mark on her chest. It was as if I had caught her doing something obscene. The look of guilt quickly turned to one of shame as she turned away from me and began putting on her bra. In that very brief but awkward moment, not a word was spoken. Emily smiled as she walked past me and out of the bathroom. I stood stunned, trying to comprehend the situation that happened. During this very short meeting, my mind couldn't escape the sight of the dark mark on Emily's chest. It actually looked like a love bite, a hickey caused by intense sucking on one area of the body. What was it really? Why was it there? Did Emily somehow hurt herself to get that black and blue mark? My mind was unwilling to accept any other alternative explanation for the origin of her bruise. Warm water washed over my body as I stood in the shower. I tried my best to put the incident out of my mind. The best I could do was push it back by starting to think about the workday ahead. At breakfast, Emily was in her usual high spirits, hurriedly getting me and the kids ready for the day. David and Olivia were nagging each other as usual as they finished breakfast and headed out the door to catch the school bus. I saw you looking at the bruise on my chest in the bathroom, Emily said when she finally sat down across the table from me. Yesterday I hurt myself at work. There was an open file drawer that I ran into and hit my chest against. It was actually stupid of me and left a small black and blue mark. Her face was calm and carefree as she shrugged as if to indicate that there was nothing more to say about the bruise. Normally, I wouldn't have given it any more thought if it weren't for the instant look of guilt in Emily's eyes when I first saw the BRU. It was a look that her explanation could not satisfy in my mind. I nodded my head silently and finished my toast. We hugged and kissed as usual as I left the kitchen and headed to the garage. Emily left for work about 10 to 15 minutes after me. I had a lot on my mind about the client meeting that was scheduled for this morning. The bathroom meeting and Emily explanation fell off my radar as I drove to work, but without knowing it, a worm of suspicion was born in my mind. It simply appeared there inside and fell asleep. Emily, my beautiful wife of 40 years, and I live what many would call the ideal American lifestyle. We live in a nice upper-middle-class suburban area. We both graduated from college and have professional careers that we constantly balance with each other and our 2 children. David, our oldest child, is 14 years old. He is a bundle of energy that rivals the Energizer Bunny. He has high school music lessons, swimming, soccer practices, and soccer games that keep him very busy. Olivia is our 12-year-old daughter. She is her daddy's little princess. Even in her early years, she mastered the feminine skills that could bend me over and wrap me around her little finger. Like most father-daughter relationships, I know I'm being manipulated. But when she turns on sweet charms, I'm helpless. My name is James. I'm a year older than my wife. I've been working for Titan Corp for the last 11 years. My current position is manager of the maintenance department located at the corporate headquarters. My department employs 22 people who perform maintenance tasks ranging from heating and air conditioning equipment to installing computers and telephones. For me, this work is not very stressful. I employ very talented people who know their business better than I do. I rarely have to make any business trips. Once or twice a year I attend a conference or workshop on innovation and building maintenance units. Emily went with me on several of these business trips. Emily is the director of public relations for a local cable television company in our area. The high level of responsibility at work makes Emily feel very good, and her work has also done wonders for her self-esteem. After the birth of our daughter, Elle thought her professional life was over and she would be relegated to the status of housewife and stay-at-home mom. By the time Olivia was 3 years old, it became obvious that Emily needed to do some activity outside the home. That would be more challenging for her than cleaning up after the kids and cooking. At first, Emily was torn between guilt and depression. She felt guilty that she couldn't cope with the demands of being a full-time mother. However, she was depressed by the fact that her entire college education was being wasted without ever being fully utilized. Everything changed when Emily's sister Emma moved to our area. Emma and Emily were complete opposites. Emma Stevens was a consummate mother and homemaker. She had no desire to challenge the world with her business acumen or be charming at the reception desk. She was quite happy with motherhood and in fact that her husband, Mark, was the main breadwinner was, in Emma's opinion, how life should be. The Stevens have 3 children, a boy and 2 girls. Adam was the eldest, followed by twins, Anna and Diva. It didn't take long for both of our children to become adopted by their aunt, and spend most of their free time at their cousin's house. This was a blessing for Emily. She and Emma agreed that Emily could begin a professional career while her sister acted as a foster mother. This was 7 years ago. Emily landed her ideal position at Cable.com, a local cable television company. She was hired as a human resources manager, reporting to the regional manager. This job was everything Emily had hoped to find in a job. It gave her a sense of accomplishment and, at the same time, some freedom away from the office. One of her main job responsibilities was to interview potential subcontractors for cable comm. She had to ensure that any subcontractor hired by cable comm complied with all state and federal employment regulations. A few weeks after meeting Emily in the bathroom with a bruised chest, I was reviewing the technical specifications in a proposal for a new telephone exchange system for corporate offices and discovered that the draft proposal had omitted a number of important points. I called to account the two employees directly responsible for drawing up the technical specifications. Although it was unusual for these two employees to screw up, I gave them a good talking to and sent them to correct the proposal. This incident frayed my already tense nerves. If I had not discovered the error in the design, the entire order would have been seriously compromised. I decided that for the rest of the day I needed to leave the office and do some stress-relieving exercise at the gym. As I left the office, I told my secretary that I would be gone for the rest of the day and that she should only call me if there was a 911s-type tragedy at the company. She smiled and silently nodded her head. The next 2 hours were spent doing an intense workout at the fitness club, which included swimming 50 laps in a large pool. A few minutes in the steam room and a nice hot shower made me feel like a new person. When I left the fitness club, it was 2 p.m. For a moment I thought about going back to the office, but my refreshed mind quickly rejected this idea, letting the group work on their own for the rest of the day. As I was driving home, an unpleasant thought flashed through my head. I have read nerd stories of husbands returning home unannounced to find their wives in the bedroom with their lover. I smiled at the thought. Emily would never cheat on me. Then the little worm of suspicion in my soul raised its ugly head and the thought of guilt in Emily's gaze gave me a twinge of doubt. For a split second I turned into the driveway. There were no unfamiliar cars on it. The garage door rose, and there were no cars in the garage either. The kids were still at school and Emily had to be at work for 3 more hours. When I entered the quiet house, I had peace and quiet at my complete disposal. Quickly changing into sweatpants and a shirt, I went into the office and turned on some light just before I could sit down in a deep chair to relax. The phone rang. Damn, I thought to myself as I stood up to answer the phone. It would be better if it wasn't a call from the office. Hello, I said, picking up the phone. Is this the Mitchell residence? A female voice spoke at the other end of the line. At first I thought it was a telemarketer making one of those annoying sales calls. Yes, it is. Who's calling? There was irritation in my voice as I confronted the caller. Oh, sorry to bother you. I wanted to talk to Emily. The woman's voice sounded very apologetic. She's still at work. Can I give her a message? I wanted to end this break and return to my solitude in a glass of Jack Daniels. I would be grateful to you. This is Nancy Clark. I wanted to call her and tell her about the cost of repairing my car. My mind sped up for a minute. Emily didn't tell me anything about Nancy Clark. Can you give me the information? Nancy now. My voice changed to a more pleasant tone as my curiosity reached its peak. Yes, tell Emily that the body shop said the tie in fender dent would cost no more than $700. Annie's voice sounded like that of a middle-aged woman. Okay, Nancy, tell me more about the accident and what happened. My voice sounded carefree, hoping that Nancy would tell me all the details. Well, it happened last week on Wednesday when Emily backed into my car in the parking lot. She did not cause any damage to her car, but the edge of her bumper broke the rear light lens and left a small dent on the fender. It wasn't too bad, so Emily told me to get an estimate and she would pay the cost of the repairs. She didn't want to report it to the insurance company, and I can understand why these insurance companies raise premiums at every opportunity. To me, it sounded like two women solving all the world's problems in a parking lot. I could imagine that accidents like this happen all the time in a mall parking lot. I said to Nancy, scribbling a note for Emily, yeah, I think accidents happen in mall parking lots all the time. Nancy said I was about to end the conversation when she added, but this happened in the parking lot of the Bluebird Motel. Damn, at that last statement, my mind lit up. So a week ago on Wednesday, Emily was at a motel and drove her car into yours. Is that right, Nancy? I tried to make my voice sound natural and hide the tension was squeezing my chest. Yes, that's right. I came to visit my sister who was staying at the motel. My husband doesn't like my sister at all, so I have to meet her at the motel whenever she comes into town. I was just getting out of the car when Emily pulled out of her parking space. She must not have noticed my car behind her when she crashed into. It's good that she wasn't driving very fast. Otherwise, the damage would have been greater. I wondered for a moment what question to ask Nancy next. There was too much chaos in my head. So I just asked, is there anything else about the accident that you can remember, Nancy? Well, nothing but thank the man who came up to look at the damage and said that my car was still quite drivable. But he also said that I would have to fix it before the police gave me a ticket for driving with a broken tail light. Was Emily upset by the accident? I heard her take a deep breath, thinking for a moment. Yes, until that kind gentleman came over to assess the damage and was kind enough to reassure both of us regarding this incident. Did this man work at the motel? I asked. No, I don't think so. In fact, I think Emily knows him, although she didn't say so. I wanted to ask her if this man looked like a kind gentleman, but this could cause some suspicion on Annie's part. She might think she gave me more information than she should have. Well, thank you, Nancy. I will pass this information on to Emily when she gets home. Does she have your phone number? I gave her the number when she gave me her business card. I also asked her for her home number, which she wrote down on the back of her card. Just in case she lost your phone number, Nancy, could you give it to me again? My home phone number is 51.343.2552 and my cell phone number is 527 at the ceiling. Thoughts were racing through my head. Now what does all of this mean? Emily didn't tell me anything about the car accident, but she probably would have told me about this as soon as it happened. Besides, why would Emily be at the Bluebird Motel on a Wednesday afternoon? The answer could be as simple as her interviewing a new subcontractor at the motel restaurant. There shouldn't have been anything secret about her being at the motel during the day. I was trying to make sense of this latest disturbing piece of information that had just come to my attention. There could be 100 different innocuous answers that could explain her presence at that motel. Nevertheless, in the depths of my consciousness, a worm of suspicion began to stir again. This may be the worst option. Perhaps Emily has a lover. How can one know this? For sure. It took two more Jack Daniels to calm my nerves. By that time the children had already come running home from school. They said their usual hey dad and headed upstairs to their rooms. About half an hour later Olivia came down and went into the kitchen to heat up the dinner Emily had prepared before leaving for work. I was still sitting in the deep chair trying to relax when I heard the garage door open and Emily enter. She came over and kissed the top of my head. "You came home early. James, is something wrong at work?" she asked, running her hand over my cheek. "Nothing special. Just left early to go to the gym for a workout and a swim. I needed some SD or stress relief." My smile gave no hint of the turmoil in my head. Olivia called out that dinner was about to be ready to be served, so Emily turned away and went upstairs to change. Dinner time was the usual chatter between the four of us, as we ate and talked about our day. David was talking about a science project he was working on with his high school friend Ethan. Olivia was chatting about her English class and her essay that was due next week. It was typical of a suburban family enjoying each other and talking about the important events of the day. Emily mentioned that her company is expanding its coverage area and she's very busy recruiting subcontractors to help install cables. I sat listening to all this wonderful chatter and thought what a wonderful family I was part of. "What about you? Dad, how was your day?" Olivia asked, giving me her daddy's little girl smile. "It was a little more stressful at work than usual. There was a serious mistake in the latest tone specifications. I almost lost my temper with the group. Instead, I gave them instructions on exactly what needed to be fixed and then left the office for the rest of the day. I went to the gym to get a good workout, de-stressing, and then returned home to relax with my loving family." I smiled back at Olivia. "Tomorrow will certainly be a better day," I added, winking at her as she giggled at my remark. I looked across the table at Emily and then spoke. "Oh, by the way, Emily, Nancy Clark called this afternoon while I was here to tell you that she received an estimate for her car repairs." Nothing in the tone of my voice betrayed the slightest hint of concern. Emily almost choked on the food she was swallowing. At that moment, our eyes met for a second and the look of guilt suddenly appeared in her eyes again, the same look that appeared when I walked into the bathroom and saw a bruise on her chest. Shock and instant fear showed on her face. "She wanted you to call her tonight. Her car is in the auto repair shop and she wants to talk to you about the price. The original estimate is around $700. There was no accusation in my voice. As I waited for Emily's answer, I could see Emily's mind going 1 mile an hour. As she mentally formulated her answer, she lowered her eyes to look at the food on her plate, but it was obvious that she could not continue to look me straight in the eyes. "What else did Nancy say about the accident?" Emily finally asked in a quiet voice. "Mom had an accident." David blurted, his eyes widening at the prospect of some exciting news. "I think so." David, "looks like Mom backed into this lady's car in the parking lot." I interrupted Emily's response. "God, Mom, when did this happen? Was anyone hurt?" It was Olivia's turn to intervene in the conversation. "Slow down. Both of you give your mom a chance to tell us all about it." I tried to calm the kids so Emily could talk. "Did Nancy say anything else about the accident?" Emily asked the question again. "As far as I can remember, no, she looked like she was in a hurry or something." I lied. "Something I've never done with my wife." Was it a little white lie to trap Emily? She seemed momentarily relieved. "It was just a minor collision in the parking lot. No one was hurt and my car was not damaged. My car's bump smashed the lady's tail light and left a small dent in her fender. That's all that happened." Emily said there were no further details. I was slightly disappointed. "When did this happen, Mom?" and where David jumped up again with his questions. "It happened last week on Thursday. I went to the mall to buy a birthday present for Carol at work. It was her birthday on Friday and I needed to buy her a gift. Emily replied in a calm businesslike tone. You were at the shopping center and didn't take me with you. Olivia looked at her mother in surprise. Shopping at the mall came first for Olivia after a sleepover with all her girlfriends. I went to the shopping center during lunch. It was a quick trip, but there and back I bought Carol a silk scarf along with a keychain for her bracelet. Emily replied, as Olivia pouted childishly. Maybe Nancy was wrong about the day. Maybe it was Thursday and not Wednesday, as she said on the phone. But I don't think she could be so wrong about where the accident occurred. Why did Emily need to change the place and day? The worm of suspicion crept deeper into my consciousness. That look in Emily's eyes, that shocked expression on her face. What's going on behind those eyes? What is my loving wife trying to hide from me? So it wasn't anything special, right? Mom, David said, disappointed lie. I think he was hoping for a more dramatic accident. The broken tail light didn't interest him much. That's right, David. It's okay. It's just that Carol's gift will cost me more than I was actually going to pay, Emily said with a soft smile on her face. She seemed to regain her composure very quickly. I did not pursue the issue further. Later that evening, the children were in their rooms doing homework. Emily went into our bedroom to call Nancy back. Maybe she wanted to talk to Nancy alone. I didn't ask why she needed privacy to make the call. The stereo was playing and the TV was off. As I sat in the office, there was an open book in my lap and a Jack Daniels in my hand. At this time my mind was in its most active analysis mode. Over the past few months, I have slowly and methodically tried to find any additional clues or unusual events that could further support the theory of infidelity that was forming in my mind. Nothing but this bruise during these months would have made me suspect that something had changed in our relationship. Our end life didn't suddenly get better or worse. Emily was still the same loving and attentive wife. She didn't dress differently. She didn't go on business trips, and she didn't work late. So why doesn't this suspicion go away in my head? But there was that look in her eyes twice. A look I've never seen before. The look of surprise and guilt on her face, which appeared only for a fleeting second, could not be explained. And now only about a car accident. These ugly thoughts made my pectoral muscles tense. I told Nancy to fix her car and I'll pay the repair shop once the job is done, Emily said as she entered the room. Her words brought my thoughts back to the present. She gave me an inquisitive look, as if expecting me to say something more about the accident. I did not comment or ask any questions. I'm sorry. I didn't mention the accident on the day it happened. Dear, I was just really stressed about the incident and didn't want you to worry about it. I was going to tell you after Nancy called me. Looks like you got her call first. I'm sorry I didn't tell you sooner. Emily sat down on the couch opposite me. I had the feeling that something was still bothering her, but she didn't know how to broach the topic. Maybe she found out that Nancy told me where and when the accident actually happened. Maybe she wanted me to ask about the inconsistencies in her story. I'm glad you settled your issue with Nancy. I'm glad something more serious didn't happen. That was my simple answer. After my response, Emily seemed to calm down a little. Aren't you going to watch Lost on TV tonight? It's tonight, isn't it? Her question seemed to sum up the accident. There was no point in dwelling on this sensitive issue. No, I think I'll skip watching it. For now I have enough mysteries and intrigue to deal with these days. I'll let Jack and the rest of the crew on the island fend for themselves this week. I smiled at her and took another sip of my drink. Well then, I guess I'll go upstairs and run myself a hot bubble bath. I'll soak until my skin turns pink. Emily said, getting up from the couch and walking towards me with a smile on her face. She leaned over and kissed my forehead. Could you check on the kids before you go to bed? I want to make sure their homework is done and that they don't stay up too late. Her voice was still the same sweet, loving voice that I had come to know and love over the past 17 years. Of course, my love. I'll crack the whip if I have to tame these two monsters of ours. Now go and soak in the bath. I made a kissing sound with my lips and she smiled and headed towards the stairs. Don't stay up late, handsome. I'll be waiting for you in bed. She giggled, walking up the steps. I felt my arousal begin to grow. Emily is a very hot and passionate woman when she's in the mood, and a hot bubble bath always lifts her spirits. I knew we were in for a hot night between the sheets when I got to bed. My first thought was how these suspicions might affect my intimate feelings for the woman I love and worship. I had no tangible evidence of any infidelity on her part. Nothing but that itchy worm of suspicion that just wouldn't go away. An hour later, I turned off everything downstairs and went upstairs to check on the kids. David was engrossed in the video game he was holding in his hand. Okay, young man, show me your homework, I said quickly, snatching the Game Boy from his hands. Oh, Dad, I was just about to go to level 10. Now you've ruined everything, David said with a pout on his face. You'll have all summer to get to level 12. If that's your goal right now, we're trying to help you finish 6th grade at school, I said, poking him lightly in the ribs. Now for your homework, young man. Olivia was already in bed. She heard a noise from her brother's bedroom and now wanted to play the role of daddy's little girl with me. It always worked. I kissed her goodnight and turned off the light. The intimacy that night with Emily was incredible. The smell of her sweet perfumed body intoxicated me. There was no distance between our thoughts or our emotions. When we made love, the only thing that mattered was the love we shared. In that moment, we didn't need words. We just cuddled up to each other in a lover's embrace and fell into a peaceful sleep. That Saturday, Emily and her sister went shopping for the girls. The children played upstairs with their cousins while Mark sat at home with the baby. Fortunately, I didn't have to do anything special and the quiet house was all mine. Since I was feeling uneasy, I decided to wash both of our cars. Emma arrived in her SUV, so Emily's car was still in the garage. It was a nice day outside, so I took my time washing and vacuuming both cars. I cleaned the carpets and then washed the trunks of both cars. While vacuuming the trunk of Emily's car, I saw a small piece of white plastic sticking out from under the edge of the wheel. Well, I pulled back the carpet and found a white bag lying on top of the spare tire. When I opened the package, my heart almost stopped in my chest. Inside it were several pieces of intimate clothing, including a nicely laced bra, panties, garter belt, and black stockings. Everything looked like it was bought at Victoria's Secret. I've never seen these clothes before. All the sales tags were removed from them, so I realized that they were not exactly new and looked like they had been worn before. The crotch of the panties smelled distinctly like a woman scent the smell of Emily. I stood there stunned, looking at the bag full of clothes that had only one purpose. Was I holding a smoking gun in my hand? Was this the missing link in the story that I had spent the last few weeks forcing myself to deny? I put everything back in the bag and returned it to where I found it. I put away the cleaning equipment and put Emily's car back in the garage. Anyone who saw me at that moment would probably think they were watching a robot or zombie walking around cars. I was in a fog. My mind refused to function properly. There was only chaos and confusion in my mind. Finally, I locked up the house and drove to the corner retail store where I bought a 6-pack of beer and then drove to the lake. There was a secluded place to park away from the weekend crowds. I sat back, cold beer in hand, and tried to process the events of the last 2 weeks until I found the underwear in the trunk of Emily's car. All I had was a vague suspicion that Emily might be unfaithful. Now, after the latest revelation, can there be any doubt about her betrayal? I didn't think there could be any other reasonable explanation, and yet I had no idea what to do next. Should I confront her immediately and demand explanations? Should I remain silent until I have certain indisputable evidence? But even then, should I deal with this terrible evidence? Should I divorce her? My mind, which is usually very good at analyzing problems, failed me miserably. There seemed to be no win solution to the dilemma. If Emily had actually cheated on our marriage. It took several hours to finish the 6-pack of beer. The sun was setting below the horizon over the lake. I felt a slight buzz from the alcohol but was far from intoxicated. I also realized that I was hungry and needed to go home. But what should I do when I get home? What kind of existence will I have to lead to maintain the status quo? The missing part of the equation was Emily's explanation of all my suspicions. Could there be rational reasons for her actions that would dispel all my doubts? I arrived home and found Emily talking on the phone. She turned and looked at me as I entered the house. Her face was full of anxiety and worry. "Oh my God, James, where have you been all day long? You made us very worried when Emma returned from the store. You weren't here. Mark didn't know where you were either." There was alarm in her voice. When she hung up, I walked into the kitchen and took a glass of cold water from the refrigerator. Our eyes never met. Until I sat down at the table, I was at the lake. I had a lot on my mind that I needed to think about and try to figure out. I looked at her and our eyes met. I saw fear in her eyes, fear mixed with anxiety, as her mind tried to evaluate the words of the person sitting at the table. "What happened? James, are you sick or something?" Her words were full of worry, but they didn't convey the fear she felt inside. "Yes, you can say that I'm sick, but this is not a physical illness. My soul hurts." At that moment, Emily's stoic demeanor crumbled before my eyes. She had no doubt that I knew her secret. She slowly sat down on one of the chairs in the kitchen. "What's his name? Do you love him?" My voice was calm, no anger in the tone or accusing tone. Emily looked at me and tears welled up in her eyes. "His name is Brian, and yes, I love him." I sat silently and looked at my sobbing wife. Her brief confession did not stun me. It didn't make me feel sick to my stomach. The suspicion I had about her infidelity had just been confirmed, leaving me with an empty emotional shell. "If you love him, then I think this means the end of our marriage." My voice was still calm. "Oh God, no, James," Emily screamed, a frightened expression appearing on her face. "I still love you, James. My love for Brian does not diminish the love I have for you." Emily's voice cracked and her body shook as if she had just been hit by a gust of cold air. Well, you are deeply mistaken if you think that I will ever agree to the role of a cuckold, and I don't want to live with a woman who confesses her love to another man. I don't see any other choice for us other than divorce." I walked out of the kitchen into the office, where I plopped down in my favorite deep chair. I didn't want to look at my unfaithful wife anymore. For me, the decision to divorce was now a foregone conclusion. It took Emily several minutes to recover enough to speak to me. She sat down on the sofa opposite me and sat in silence for a while before she spoke. I know this must be a terrible shock for you, James, to find out that I was unfaithful to you. But I really think you should listen to my explanation before you end our marriage. She tried to speak in a soft, loving voice, but I simply turned my face away from hers. Tell me one thing, Emily, do you still want to have an intimate relationship with this guy, Brian? She closed her eyes, took a deep breath and simply answered, yes. Then there's nothing left of our marriage. Since you are a cheater, I will file for divorce in the morning and I will seek primary custody of the children. I don't want to expose my young, impressionable children to an adulterous environment. If you want Brian to be your lover, then it must be without custody of the children. My voice took on an aggressive IV tone. The time had come to show my position as the head of the family and the offended husband. Emily's cheating may have hurt my ego, but I wasn't going to give in and let her have the kids. Please, James, do not do that. I told you I still love you. I don't want a divorce, and I especially don't want my children taken away from me. Emily was sobbing and shaking again as the reality of my decision sank into her mind. Your statement I love you is a farce. At the same time, you confess your love for another man. Your actions speak louder than any of your words. Your actions tell me that I'm not the man who can fully satisfy you. As a woman, I cannot and will not accept cock-led status. I lowered my head and said in a softer voice, I want you to pack your bags and leave this house immediately. I don't want to be in the same house with you anymore. You have lost your right to live in it. No, James, you can't just throw me out like an old shoe. This is my home. My children and I live here. Emily was almost hysterical when I rose to my feet. This is where I live. I live here with my children. You are an adulteress and I will not allow you to live in the same house with us. I shouted at her as anger rose within me. Now pack your clothes and leave the house. I'm going to take the children from Emma, and when I return, I don't want to find you in this house. I walked to the door, turned and said I'll be back in an hour so that you won't be here. Tell Emma where you'll be staying and I'll make sure you get the rest of your things. I closed the door behind me as Emily continued to beg me to change my mind as soon as I walked into the Stephen house. Mark knew something was terribly wrong. He had never seen me so upset. What the hell happened to you? Mark asked, approaching me. Total crap, Mark. Just complete crap, I said, leaning against the wall. As I said this, I slowly turned my head from side to side. Emily has taken a lover and doesn't want to end this affair. It's over for the two of us. I told her to pack some clothes and leave the house. File for divorce. In the morning, Mark stood there, stunned by the words I had just spoken. There was never any sign that our marriage was in jeopardy, just the opposite. Emily and I seemed like the perfect married couple with two beautiful children. Just then Emma came around the corner and saw us standing in shocked silence. What happened here? Her eyes quickly moved from her husband's face to mine and back. James just found out that Emily is cheating on him, Mark said sadly, looking intently at his wife. Do you know anything about this? Emily tells you everything, doesn't she? Emma's face couldn't hide the fact that she knew about Emily's secret. She didn't tell me everything, only that she met her long-lost high school sweetheart. She didn't tell me she was sleeping with him. Her voice didn't sound very convincing. So you knew there was something wrong with it, didn't you? Ugh. I barked at her in an accusing voice. I tried to tell her not to get involved with Brian. Their high school relationship was a thing of the past and she shouldn't jeopardize her marriage by trying to live out some teenage fantasy. Now her eyes were focused on some point on the floor. She couldn't look me straight in the eyes. How long ago did this happen? I barked at her about 10 weeks ago. Emma said in a low voice, "What else do you know?" My anger was still building strongly. Emily said that Brian owns a small construction company. He didn't know. Emily worked for Cablecom when he applied for the subcontract work. Emily was shocked when she first saw his name on the application form. Emma walked out of the corridor and sat down on the sofa. Her head was lowered as if in embarrassment. After she told me that she met Brian for lunch, she didn't talk about him to me anymore. I was trying to find out if there was anything going on between them. She refused to talk to me about Brian. Emma took a deep breath. Mark said nothing when his wife admitted that she knew about the contact between Emily and Brian. At this moment, he had no idea what to do or say. Damn women. I shouted at my sister-in-law, even though she's your sister. You should have told Mark or me that something might happen to Emily. Now it's too late. Our marriage is over. I told Emily to pack her things and get out of my house. The veins on my neck stood out as my anger spiraled out of control. When Emma looked at me, horror flashed in her eyes. You won't throw Emily out into the street. She's your wife and I know she loves you. James, she said, her voice trembling. Now Emma began to cry loudly. She also told me that she loves Brian and that she wants to continue her romance with him. I shouted back at her, "This damn adulteress deserves to be outside." I knew I needed to get away from Emma before my rage got out of control. Where are David and Olivia? I turned to Mark. They're playing in the backyard. Mark said. I turned and walked to the back door as I went out to pick up the children. The phone on the far table rang. 2 teenagers ran up to me as soon as they saw me. "Come on, gang. Let's go get some burgers at Mickey D's," I said with a forced smile on my face. "Dad, can Ina and Ava come with us?" Olivia asked with a languid smile on her face. "Of course they can, if their mother and father allow it," I answered. "Let's go in and ask them." Olivia called out to the others running into the house. Emma was talking on the phone with Emily. I muttered, "Why didn't Emma cry?" when I entered the house. Olivia asked from the back seat of the car. She had a bad day. I think she received some bad news that alarmed her. I answered, "My daughter. So that's why she said she wanted Ina to stay home today." Dad, David interrupted the conversation. "I guess so, David. There's a lot going on right now. That's upsetting a lot of people. We can talk more about this when we get home." David and Olivia were finishing their fries. When I turned away from them and pressed the speed dial button on my cell phone, the phone rang several times. Then a woman's voice answered. "Hello." It was Emma's voice in a quiet voice. I told her we'd be leaving here soon and when we get home, Emily better not be there. The children were more interested in what was happening around them. To pay any attention to my telephone conversation. "James, be reasonable. Emily has a serious emotional crisis because of this. She has nowhere to go and doesn't want to be left without her children." Emma tried to mediate for her sister. "I don't care where she goes. She can go live with her new lover. I don't care." Fury grew inside me again. She better not be there when we get home. Otherwise the kids will find out the hard way what a cheating their mother really is. I pressed the off button and took a deep breath, trying to suppress my anger. "What happened, Dad?" Olivia asked, seeing the strange expression on my face. I tried my best to smile and act carefree. "Nothing special, honey. Well, talk more when we get home." When the three of us returned, the house was empty. "Where's Mommy?" they both asked when they saw the empty house. She needed to do something. "Mommy will be away for a while until everything is settled." I avoided a serious answer to the child's question. "Now go upstairs to your rooms. I want your homework done. Within the next hour I'll go up to tuck you in and say goodnight." When I walked into the bedroom, I noticed that a lot of her clothes were missing from Emily's side of the main closet. Her cosmetics were also missing from the bathroom vanity. Even though my anger was still at the forefront, I felt a strong sense of loss as I realized the reality of Emily's absence. And yet I knew that even more painful moments lay ahead. I lay on my back in a dark bedroom and looked at the ceiling. There were so many little things that I had to do in the near future. The most important thing was the emotional health and well-being of both my children. Had to tell them that their mother will no longer live with them, that she wouldn't be there to love and comfort them every night, that when they get sick she won't be there to be the doctor mom. In my own mind I was struggling with my decision to fight for custody of my children. I wanted them to grow up happy and healthy. Wouldn't they be better off living with their mother and her new lover? Maybe it was my bruised ego. Maybe it was actually my devotion to my children, but I soon gave up the idea of giving my children to my unfaithful wife. I will fight tooth and nail to keep them living here with me. The next few days were traumatic and heartbreaking for me. I immediately began divorce proceedings through my lawyer. I was able to obtain a restraining order prohibiting Emily from having contact with me or the children. Emily hired a lawyer and fought the restraining order, but it took a week or more to get results in the courts. David and Olivia were now confused and upset by the events that had taken place in their once happy and loving home. I sat down with them and tried to explain that their mom and dad were having serious problems staying married to each other. The children couldn't understand what had happened and why their parents couldn't just kiss and make up. I told them that there are problems that are too serious to simply forget about. I specifically didn't tell them about their mother's new lover, no matter how painful these episodes with the children were. I was determined to stick to my position when I finally spoke to Emily on the phone a week after I forced her to move out of the house. I made my first threats to her. I said that in our state there are laws against alienation of affection by a third party. I told Emily that if she continued to fight against my custody of the children, I would press charges against Brian and sue him for alienation of affection and ruining our marriage. I also said that I would report her affair to Cablecom senior management as a conflict of interest on her part. She will likely be fired from her job and Brian's company will be banned from doing business with Cablecom. These pleas were met with my sarcastic remarks that she had made her choice. I made it very clear that I would not be a cuckold, nor would I live in an open marriage. The phone call ended with Emily still begging me to change my mind. I then had a long conversation with my sister-in-law about David and Olivia visiting their cousins. I told her in no uncertain terms that I would not allow Emily in Emma's house if there were children there. I have established rules of conduct that will govern my relationship with the Stevens family. Emma finally capitulated to my demands for the sake of 5 children. She knew that if I limited or canceled my nephew's visits, both families would suffer. The divorce papers were drafted so that I would remain the primary caregiver and have custody of the children. Emily took my threat seriously and withdrew her objections to this part of the agreement. She received visitation rights every other weekend, provided that her lover would be absent during these visits. She would pick up and drop off the kids at her sister's house so that I wouldn't have to be there when she came to their house. This mutual agreement allowed the divorce process to continue. A month after Emily moved out of the house, I looked in the bathroom mirror and saw a man who had aged 10 years and 4 weeks. Every evening, the children insisted that I make peace with their mother so that she could return to us. These clashes took a toll on the three of us. In addition to losing my wife, I now felt that I was on the verge of losing the love of my children. I took an early leave from work so I could spend more time with my children. Gradually, the tension between the children and me decreased, but I could still see that they missed their mother and their once happy family life. Being a single parent was becoming very stressful for me. I ended up hiring a housekeeper to run the house and do maid work. I also did this to ensure there was an adult at home when the kids got home from school. Margarita was an elderly Hispanic grandmother who accepted the position. She moved into one of the guest bedrooms and immediately took over all the household chores. It didn't take long for David and Olivia to accept her as their adoptive grandmother. In addition to her household responsibilities, she also began teaching the children Spanish. Quiet stability gradually returned to the Mitchell household. The children stopped pressuring me to allow their mother to return to their house. The children's weekends with their mother soon became part of their daily routine. They seemed to have adjusted better to not having their mother in the same house as them. Coming home after visiting her became less stressful for them. When they returned home after visiting Emily, Margarita always prepared their favorite dish. Yet this was no longer the same loving family. My life was especially stressful due to the trauma I suffered after discovering Emily's infidelity and then losing her presence in the house deep down. I truly missed her love and companionship. I went about my daily activity. It is at home and at work as best I could. At times, my actions were more like those of a robot than a thinking person. There was a huge hole in my mind and soul. Something very valuable was ripped out of my perfect life, something that may never be replaced. The once close relationship between the Stevens and me was now separated by a very large gulf. The cousins remained very close friends and still spent most of their time together, but the closeness I once had with Emma and Mark was almost gone because of the rules I set up weeks ago. Emma didn't try to convince me to give Emily another chance. She was torn between loyalty to her sister and the feeling that Emily was solely responsible for the suffering that now reigned in the two families. One evening when I went to pick up the children at Emma, she pulled me aside and handed faithful to him no matter what. Instead of hunting and dating other boys in my senior class, I focused all my efforts on improving my GPA and scoring high on the academic assessment tests. All these efforts paid off in the form of acceptance in the scholarship to the University of Texas. My sister, Emily, was already a student at the University of Texas. She could help me move and start working on campus. All these wonderful things made me very happy. In his letters, Brian also praised my efforts and results. And yet I was missing the anticipation of summer, since we were thousands of miles apart. In August, the second bomb exploded but was not as destructive in its power as the first, associated with Brian's move to Germany. This time the bomb was an interruption in the flow of daily letters that Brian and I exchanged. There was a whole week when I didn't receive any mail from Brian. I became very worried about Brian and even tried to contact him by phone, but it didn't work. The phone number had changed. In the next letter I received from Brian, he reported that his father was accidentally killed during a training exercise. His letter was very short and he said that he was having difficulties with his mother. He didn't go into detail. I continued to send Brian my daily letters, trying to express my sympathy for the loss of his father and trying to cheer him up during those very difficult times. The last letter I received from Brian said that his mother was very sick and had been sent to the hospital. Now he tried his best to take care of his younger sister and bring order to the family. He ended his letter by declaring his undying love for me and declaring that one day we would be together. I continued to write to Brian every day, although I did not receive any response. September found me on the University of Texas campus with my sister Emily. I wasn't sure I was emotionally ready to take on the challenges of university life. All I could think about was that my true love was facing extremely difficult problems in Germany and I wasn't there to help him. If Emily had not helped me during the first months of university, I am sure that I would have been expelled during Thanksgiving holiday. The first of my letters was returned with the note returned to sender address unknown. That little notice on the envelope was like a dagger piercing my heart. I had not received letters from Brian for more than a month. Now it turns out that he did not receive any of my letters. I was a lost soul. It seemed like nothing in my life mattered to me anymore. I felt that I could die and would not regret leaving my empty world once again. Emily and her constant nudging gave me the strength to move forward. Eventually, I had to restart my therapy. This time, it was with a different therapist. Thanks to her help and guidance, I pulled myself together and again focused all my energy on my studies and future career. And yet something deep inside was missing. It must have been a part of my soul, because I felt spiritually numb and empty. After a whole year of not hearing anything from Brian, I pushed the memories of him into the background and essentially married him. All of his previous letters were packed into several shoeboxes and stored in the back of my closet. As an additional note, James, of the video games at Maif, you knew nothing about these letters. I kept them until the day you proposed marriage to me. Your love and this offer began to heal my wounded soul. That weekend, I burned all of Brian's letters and scattered the ashes in the Colorado River. Brian was finally at peace. For good or so I thought I never told you about him, and I told my entire family never to mention him to you or to me ever. What followed after college were 17 of the most wonderful years that a woman, wife and mother could ever dream of in my entire life. You have to believe these words, James. They are the absolute truth. This next section of my explanation may seem strange and some of it is absolutely absurd. This letter will contain something that defies logic and common reason. And yet, after all, the dust from my words is settled. You will find one terribly tormented woman, a woman who had to face some very serious revelations in her life. As you know, one of my main responsibilities at Cablecom is to review and approve all subcontractors who perform work or services for Cablecom. My department's review process focuses on the subcontractors' past and present compliance with all state and federal labor laws. We do not enter into labor contracts with subcontractors who hire illegal immigrants or violate labor hour laws. To qualify for a contract with Cablecom, subcontractors must complete a lengthy application form. These applications are reviewed by 2 of my assistants, and those candidates who pass the initial screening are then sent to my office for review. On March 14th, a stack of applications landed on my desk. There were 6 folders for my review, which I began immediately after lunch. The third folder I opened was a questionnaire from the construction company CJ Builders. I read the summary page that Laura, my assistant, had done as part of her initial review. Her brief comments were very favorable to CJ Builders, so I started reading the details in the application form. When I got to the company owner section, I felt like I had just hit a brick wall at 60 mph. Brian is the sole owner of CJ Builders. I don't know how long it took me to catch my breath after reading Brian's name on the application. My mind seemed to explode inside my head. Complete confusion reigned in my shocked mind. Could this man be my Brian? Could this man be the Brian who confessed his undying love to me so many years ago? The rest of that day was a waste for me. I told Laura to do more research on CJ Builders and its owner, Brian. That day I left work early and returned home to try to gain control of my mind again. I needed you and the children by my side to strengthen the loving bond we share as a family. No matter how hard I tried, I could not completely push thoughts about Brian back into that dark cold hole where the memory of him had been imprisoned for more than 20 years. I remember the four of us having a great family evening, chatting and enjoying games of Scrabble before the kids went to bed. I also remember that we didn't make love that night. Although I was in the mood for you to take me intimately, the rest of the week felt like working in a forced labor camp. I tried my best to concentrate on daily tasks. Friday came and went and Laura was still checking the details of CJ Builders. I deliberately made Saturday and Sunday completely crazy for myself. Every little project that I had put off until now was something I took on with gusto. You even noticed that I must have taken a double dose of my morning vitamins. It was a Herculean task to suppress in my mind the thoughts about Brian that did not allow me to take possession of him. On Monday morning, Laura arrived with another small stack of application folders. She said that checking the information about CJ Builders showed that it was at its best. She left my office and closed the door behind her. I remember looking at the top folder as if it were a poisonous snake ready to strike. It took me a few minutes of staring at the folder before I reached out and opened it. There on the first biographical page was all the information I needed to confirm that this Brian was in fact my Brian. The report also indicated that he had been single for 9 years since the divorce and lived in Brighton, approximately 30 mil from my office. My body went cold as a flood of repressed memories hit my mind like a tsunami wave. All those feelings that I thought were long forgotten and buried rose up and shook me to the core. It was impossible for me to think about anything other than Brian and that youthful love that we shared. So briefly, 20 years ago I turned to Emily again for advice and comfort. She knew that there was a serious problem when I came to her house early that afternoon to talk. She was the only living relative who knew about Brian and our relationship before his father was killed in Germany. She has always been my support and faithful advisor. Now I need her advice more than ever. After I told Emily about my discovery, she had a very puzzled look on her face. It took her a few minutes to collect her thoughts before she said that I should forget about Brian completely and let his memory rest in peace, although it wasn't necessary. She reminded me of the fabulous life we led as a family. She told me that Brian was in the past and had to stay in the past if I wanted to keep our family intact. I knew she was right. I knew I had everything a woman could want or expect in a loving family relationship. And yet there was an annoying voice of curiosity in my mind that could not shut up. The next week, my curiosity could no longer be contained. I asked Laura to make an appointment with Mr. Brian for the next day. Brian had no way of knowing who I was, other than that I was the last person in the application approval process. He was simply asked to come to Mrs. Emily's office the next afternoon. Despite my best efforts to control myself, my emotions were a raging inferno. What will happen during this first meeting? Will Brian remember me? Are there any feelings left between us? I didn't sleep very well that night. Driving to work that morning was like going to a wake. The anticipation was almost overwhelming. My conscience rebelled. Every nerve in my body was frayed. At 2:30, there was a knock on my door and Laura stuck her head in to say that Mr. Brian had arrived for his 2:30 appointment. Brian came into my office and Laura closed the door. There was a split second when Brian looked at me with a confused expression on his face. Then he simply asked, "Emily, is that you, Emily?" I stood up from the table on legs that felt like they were made of rubber. "Yes, Brian. It's me, Emily." None of us knew what to say. Next there was silence for a very long second. Then I told him to sit in front of my desk. I could see that Brian was in slight shock when he saw me. For the first time in 20 years, he didn't know what he should do or say. I asked him how he was and commented on the fact that he looked very fit and healthy. Still, he found it difficult to cope with the situation. I changed the subject and then started telling him about the application approval process. He sat silently, not saying a word when I told him that his application had been approved and that he would be able to contact the editing director to receive his contract assignments. How I managed to talk to him for more than 15 minutes without breaking down and turning into a trembling jelly I will never know. I simply smiled politely when I finished and asked if he had any questions regarding the contract or the job. He silently shook his head slowly, but his eyes never left my face. When I indicated that the meeting was over, he very slowly rose from his chair, rising to his feet. He seemed to finally be able to get over some of his initial shock. He thanked me for endorsing his company and then said he would like to meet me for lunch. I said we could meet the next day at Brian's restaurant across the street from my office. He seemed pleased with my answer, but still didn't know how to end the meeting, so he just smiled and said he would meet me at Brian's the next day at noon. After Brian left my office, I leaned back in my chair. My chest tightened as I realized that the first love of my life had just risen from the dead. The next day at lunch, nothing happened except Brian telling me the grisly details of what happened after his father was killed. His mother had always been a fragile woman. The news of her husband's death caused her to have a nervous breakdown. She had to be placed in a psychiatric hospital. Now Brian was forced to take on the role of head of the family. He had to comfort and support his little sister. The army arranged for Brian and Jennifer to be sent back to live with their grandparents. Their mother remained in a mental institution. When Brian and his younger sister returned to Montana, even before Brian and his sister moved in with their grandparents, they were told that their mother had committed suicide in the hospital. In a short period of time, less than a month, Brian and Jennifer became orphans. Brian said that his grief and the burden placed on him by the death of his parents were the main reasons he stopped writing to me. He felt he could no longer keep the promises he made to me. Other more serious demands were also placed on him. He wanted me to be happy and move forward in my life, so he stopped writing in the hope that I would find another man to love. During our lunch conversation, Brian never made any statements about wanting to be a part of my life again. He knew that I was married and the mother of 2 children. I believe he was truly happy for me and for my life as your wife. The meal ended with a handshake. As Brian headed to his car in the parking lot, I returned to my office and tried again to carry on with my daily work. Unfortunately for me, those early memories persisted, no matter how hard I tried to push them into the background. Emily kept telling me not to see Brian again and to forget about him. I no longer told her about my meetings with Brian. I was probably too ashamed to talk about my betrayal. James, I really tried to follow Emily's advice. For over a week I struggled with my inner demons. The next week I finally gave in and called Brian and asked if we could meet again for lunch. That next lunch was the beginning of my infidelity. There was no seduction or intimacy involved, but during our meal I confessed to Brian that I had never stopped loving him. He admitted the same thing to me. At that moment I realized that I needed Brian to become a part of my life again. It was I, James, not Brian, who set the wheels in motion on what became several intimate dates for us, before major discoveries somewhere in the following weeks. I became a different person. Somehow I began to feel that I was two different women living in one body. When I was with you and the children, I was still the same loving wife and mother I always was when I was with Brian. I was again the young girl who found her lost love and again held him in her arms. I knew it was wrong. There are no justifications, no arguments for my actions. All I can sincerely tell you, James of the video game Subnautica, is that my love for you has not diminished at all. Contrary to many stories you may have read, there was never any rivalry between you and Brian. In my mind, you were my husband and he could never become my husband. These were my thoughts during those days of confusion and turmoil. For me, never. And it's true that I never thought about leaving you for Brian. All I can hope for at this point in our lives is that you will reconsider your decision to divorce. I don't want to be the former, Mrs. James. I want to remain your wife and live together, as we have lived since we got married. But as much as I would love to tell you that I would never see Brian again, I would only be lying to you. Brian is back in my life and I don't want to lose him again. This should not be the case in marriage, my dear and beloved husband, but I can't help myself because I feel the way I do now. I wish we could somehow come to an agreement that would allow us to live together as the family we've always been and share it with my double life. If you find the strength to meet with me, maybe I can better explain my feelings and answer any questions you have about me. But my dear husband, I desperately want to remain your loving wife. I love you now and forever. Your loving wife, Emily. I sat with the letter in my hand. I now knew more about Brian and Emily than I previously knew about their past relationship. It may have been a lost, unfulfilled teenage romance for Emily and Brian, but I wouldn't have any part in making it happen. Emily's letter was a real confession, but it didn't change anything in my mind now. I knew that there could never be complete reconciliation between us. She once again said that she needed Brian to be a part of her life. There was no way I could be part of this agreement. I put the letter back in the envelope and set it aside for later, when I could let David and Olivia read it and understand why their parents got divorced. I kept silent about reading the letter. Finally, a few days later, Emily stopped me and asked if I had read the letter. It doesn't change anything. Everything that Emily and I had for 17 years is now over. I don't want to date her or ever see her again. The divorce will be finalized next week. I turned and walked away from the very sad sister-in-law. The decision to divorce was made without my presence. I invited my lawyer to attend the hearing. When the decree was made official, I was told that Emily was there and cried when the judge made his decision. I had a desire that I should never have been forced to meet Emily face to face. Whenever necessary, I informed her about my plans for the children through her sister. The instructions were simply from us she should stay away from us and not try to interfere in our affairs. Essentially, she no longer existed in my world 6 months after the divorce. Emily and Brian got married. Over the next 2 years, they had a baby boy. They remained living in Brighton. Emily's close relationship with David and Olivia continued over the years. Olivia was especially excited when her mother gave birth to her new half-brother after the divorce. I never met Emily or her family. In my opinion, she died on the day I made my fateful discovery. I remained a strict and loving father, completely devoting myself to my children as they grew up. I refused to go on dates with numerous women who constantly tried to get into a relationship with me. Emily was the only woman I've ever loved enough to want intimacy instead of nighttime female companionship. I focused my attention on my children, my work, and even became involved in local politics. Love can be a magnificent thing, but love can also be a very destructive force when stupidity decides to play its pranks. This is what happened to Emily and me.